take a deep breath because we are 1 week out from election night. And this is our third town hall here that we've partnered up with Oakland University and the Center for Civic Engagement to talk about a lot of the issues surrounding the election. So glad that you're joining us here in person. We've got our audience here, and if you're joining us from home on clickondetroit.com and Local 4 Plus, we really appreciate it. If you miss any of this conversation or you want to watch it back, we're going to make sure that we have it for you on demand. But I want to jump into everything right now because I think we have so much to talk about in what everything really means and what we saw happen on election night a week ago. And so joining me, of course, as always, Dave Dulio, who is the head of the Center for Civic Engagement here at Oakland University. And on my left is Nicole Matthews. She's an associate poli-sci professor here as well at Oakland University. So it's good to have you here. Are you all taking a deep breath like we all are?
It never stops though, right, Christy?
It
We're into cabinet picks and 2026 is just right around the corner.
No, it's not, Dave. Don't say that. Nicole, what about you?
Well, we just found out who won the House, so that's pretty exciting.
That's right. When you look at, again, and I think it also goes to speak about how each state is able to do their vote tallies and do their counts differently, that we finally do have the results right now. And we know
a little faster than last time. I think it was a Saturday. I was raking the leaves when I found out Biden had won last time.
So here we all are, and I guess I want to get from both of you first off, when we look specifically at Michigan, and we can go wide, and then I really want to focus on what's going to be happening here in Michigan for us and policy impact. What do you think the vote said about the voters here in Michigan? Dave, let me start with you.
Well, I think we got a mixed message with Donald Trump carrying the state at the presidential level, but Alyssa Slotkin carrying it at the senatorial level. I think that sends some mixed signals. I think the presidential race for me was a change election, and I think that's reflected in the fact that that Trump won the popular vote, Trump won all 7 of the swing states, and the country shifted pretty dramatically in from coast to coast in terms of support for Trump, moving in some cases heavily or significantly more Republican in each county. So I think that while it's a change election nationally, I think the Slotkin team did just enough to demonstrate and to really cement Michigan as a purple swing state.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say, because again, you look at that, you look at the fact that Alyssa Slotkin won that seat, but you had the Michigan Republicans flip the House, the state House, but then you also had 2 Democratic Party-backed candidates for Supreme Court who won. So you still have this mix of both.
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court race was really a failure of the Republican Party to get their candidates elected. They turned out a ton of people to vote for Trump. Some people left the Senate blank. A lot of people left the Supreme Court blank, and that was seats on the table that they could have picked up.
Is it because, why do you think that is though, Dave? Is that not voter education, or that's people not looking down ballot and knowing what they're voting for?
Maybe both, but I also think too that what is an interesting conflict there is Republicans picked up some seats on U of M's Board of Regents, the MSU board,
and Wayne State,
and Wayne State,
them,
right?
The exception of one at Michigan.
Those are both down ballot, right? And you would expect, if you would have seen one, sort of, I would think they would have both gone in the same direction, right? But not the case. With the Slotkin race, I think that ballot fall off is definitely a factor, but I also think that there were some crossover votes. I think there were some Trump-Slotkin ticket splitters.
Interesting. What do you think about that, Nicole?
Yeah, Slotkin actually got fewer votes than Harris. It's just that Rogers got a lot fewer votes than Harris, and so he didn't do as good a job turning out those Republican voters. And I think with regard to the Supreme Court, Republicans didn't do their homework. You have to look up who endorsed the judicial candidates. It doesn't say it on the ballot. And those judicial candidates that were endorsed by the Republican Party got over 1 million fewer votes than Trump. There was huge drop-off on the Republican side, not as much on the Democratic side, and I have to wonder if people are at home filling out an absentee ballot, which Democrats are a little more prone to do, they're in a better position to do their homework and look up who nominated those judicial nominees.
And there's also a factor in there, too, of there were a lot of voters that came out and voted for Trump who were Trump first and Republican second, right? I mean, they went in the voting booth, voted for Trump, and that was it, right? That's all they really cared about.
Well, and that was Trump's message. I alone can fix it, not I and Mike Rogers and a Republican majority can fix it.
Let's talk a little bit about demographics, because I think it's so interesting to see when you see the national press talking about Michigan and who the voters are and what types of voters should be turning out. I want to talk specifically about, we talk about men and women, the breakdown there, and also the Arab American vote when it came to the Israel-Gaza conflict. How do you think all of those demographics came into play here in Michigan?
Well, I think Michigan is like the nation in many ways, where, except on the Arab American front, we can come back to that, but Trump did better in 2024 than he did in 2020 with almost every demographic out there. I think, he may have fallen back a little bit with women overall, but younger women, more middle-aged women, he improved his standing.
I like how you put that in quotes, Dave, middle age.
Yeah, well, air quotes are good for a lot. The African-American men, right? I think that you see a shift to Trump in almost every category, and it was something that nobody really picked up on beforehand, right? I mean, it was all we heard about in the week or so leading up was this gender gap that was gonna cost him the election, and it didn't.
What do you make of all of that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think that the Harris campaign thought that they were going to overperform with women, and they just performed. And they needed to do better than that. And I thought they were emphasizing the abortion issue because they thought that was going to really stick. Well, it turns out a lot of states, abortion rights are protected. You don't need to vote for Donald Trump to have your abortion rights. It's in your state constitution now. And I think that wasn't as big of an issue for women voters as they thought it was going to be.
I think you bring up an interesting point, because that takes me to thinking about messaging and all the different messaging we heard, not only on the national level, but also that dripped down into the state house races. You saw millions and millions of dollars put into ad campaigns to try to change the power balance in the state house. And a lot of campaigns did talk about the abortion issue, and then talked about saving democracy. Dave, let me ask you, messaging-wise, what do you think was most effective when the campaigns now step back and say, did we spend the money that we should have spent, and did we spend it on the right thing?
At the presidential level or below, right? So let's start with the state house races. Yeah, I saw an innumerable number of state house ads. Number one, that I had no chance to vote for any of those candidates that were advertising on Channel 4. I didn't live in their districts. You could see half a dozen different state house candidates all talking about abortion. And it just wasn't the driver that Democrats hoped it would be or thought it would be. But at the same time, I think, and I said this beforehand, so it's not total hindsight, but abortion was pretty much all Democrats had, right? I mean, they couldn't talk about the economy because people were perceiving it to be negative. They couldn't talk about immigration, right? Those were the two big sort of policy issues. There's the air quotes again. The policy issues that simply favored Republicans. So Democrats smartly tried to make it about something where they had an advantage, and that was abortion.
Talk to me then a little bit about, on the national level, all the ads that we saw.
So I think the Trump campaign ads that used Kamala Harris's words against her were incredibly effective. And honestly, I think the ad that they did that ended, I think it was Kamala's for they, them, President Trump's for you. I think that was incredibly effective.
Nicole, what do you make of some of the messaging?
Yeah, I think one of their most effective ads was Harris saying on The View, I wouldn't do anything differently than Biden. And that really hurt, because this was an election where people care a lot about inflation. All across the world, we're having elections that incumbents are being thrown out because inflation is high, so it's not unique to the United States. But that was something that she really didn't do anything. She could have easily had at least one thing that she differentiates herself from Biden that she didn't do.
And it was shocking that they weren't ready for that the first time, the second time, and the third time that she got asked that question, right? I mean, that is something that you would think that campaign's full of smart people, right?
Yeah.
But they just didn't have the answer to the question. It reminds me of in 1980 when Ted Kennedy was running for president and was asked, why are you running? And he couldn't answer it, right? I mean, it was shockingly bad, arguably worse than the answer to this question. But yeah, I think you got to be ready for that, and they weren't.
And I don't think they had the policies that were going to reach out to those non-college educated working class voters that were concerned about inflation. In the past, how have Democrats reached out to them? I'm going to give you health care. We're going to raise the minimum wage. Well, we have the health care now. We have Obamacare now. That's not as big of an issue anymore. And minimum wage, there's signs outside Kroger that say $16 an hour. Why am I going to vote for a Democrat who's going to raise the minimum wage to $15?
So it brings an interesting question because of course this, everyone is hindsight 2020 and trying to figure out what things went wrong in the Democratic Party, the Republicans saying, what did we do right? I want to look now at the state level. You have a Republican Party here that if we talked about it, and Dave, I think you and I did about a year and a half ago, saying they're in disarray. There's no organization here. Pete Hoekstra had just stepped forward literally 11 months ago. What do you see about the shift of power now locally here in the Democratic and the Republican parties in Michigan?
Well, if there was an award for state party chair of the year, like, in the MVP, I think Pete Hoekstra would win it. He brought the state Republican Party back from the dead.
Did he benefit? Did he benefit though from circumstance, and did he benefit the way voters and the electorate thought? Because if you could say the Democrats, they were knocking on doors, they had more money, they had a better ground game.
I think from where it started to where it ended up, the Republican Party structurally is in a better place than certainly than it was, and I think the change over time is remarkable. It's not perfect, that's for sure, and they've got their challenges, but they were able to at least raise some money. They were at least able to field some volunteers. But at the sort of elected level, it's just gridlock now, right? I mean, it's Republicans take control of the state house, and anything that happens is by definition now, and maybe this is a good thing, anything that happens is going to have to be bipartisan.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting. I do want to talk a little bit about, local politics and what we could be seeing out of the State House, because we're going into a lame duck session where you have the Democrats who think, all right, this is the last time that we've got the trifecta here. We need to see what we can push forward and then what a new agenda could be. Nicole, let me ask you, when we look at that and how things could shape, what is your assessment of the strength of the Democratic Party here in Michigan and the Republicans?
Well, I think they're going to look back on these last 2 years and really feel like they squandered their trifecta. They had a surprisingly lack of urgency to pass a bunch of policies through the state legislature.
Which ones specifically are you thinking about?
Whitmer has several times called for paid leave. They don't even have they don't even have concepts of a plan. They haven't held a hearing about paid leave. Like, if you compare what Michigan did with their trifecta and what Minnesota did with their trifecta, and that's probably why Walz got chosen to be the VP, was how much they accomplished in a 5-month session in Minnesota compared to we meet year-round. They seem to be spending half the year twiddling their thumbs.
The Democrats would probably point to some of the wins on their side and say, look, we pushed through LGBTQ protections, we pushed through gun control legislation, and a number of other things that they said that they maybe have taken advantage of in these last 2 years, Dave.
Yeah, and I think that they maybe they got caught, patting themselves on the back a little bit. But I do think it's worth noting that I think the Democratic bench in terms of potential candidates for 2026.
That's my crystal ball question at the end.
Well, we won't spoil it.
No,
but
go ahead.
The bench on the Democratic side is incredibly deep, right? Mm-hmm. They have candidates coming out their ears who can run for governor. Republicans have nobody. Really? I mean,
I saw a list of people, and it was the same people that ran last time.
Oh, did you really?
For Republicans? Yeah. Oh.
Dixon.
Oh, really? Tudor Dixon? Interesting. All right, we're going to have to noodle that one over in the crystal ball. All right, I want to jump now, though, nationally to what we are seeing is going to be a Republican trifecta in Washington, which is going to be very interesting in terms of policy-wise and policy change. Let me ask both of you, and Dave, let me start with you. What kind of impact you're going to do that we think that we're going to be seeing here in Michigan in terms of policy that will impact us directly? I'm thinking about EVs. I'm thinking about environmental protections because I always think about the lakes. And then I'm also thinking about immigration because I'm thinking about the farm, the agriculture industry here in Michigan, and the reliance on migrant labor.
Yeah, I think in the last couple of days we've seen the Trump transition folks and some of his with their picks and some of their statements, and then some of the things that those choices for positions in a Trump administration have said, right? That the Trump administration is going to be exactly what Trump said it was going to be during the campaign.
During the campaign.
Yeah. He's going to do what he said he was going to do, right? I mean, deportations are coming. I mean, that's you listen to Tom Homan, the guy who was named Border Czar, which I think is interesting because that's not a formal title. Meaning it's not going to have to go through Senate confirmation. You look at what Lee Zeldin has said as the pick to lead EPA, right? He's talking about emissions and EVs, and I think you're going to see a lot of executive action on those, not to mention what might be able to come through the Congress. But I think on the energy front, I think Lee Zeldin and whoever emerges as Secretary of Energy are going to team up and really try to push through major changes.
What do you think, Nicole?
I think it's going to be a rough transition for Republicans from being the opposition party to being the governing party. Even though they do have the trifecta, immediately in January, we're going to hit a debt limit ceiling. They're going to have to find enough votes to suspend or increase the debt limit, and I suspect 0 Democrats are going to help them do that. Some of Trump's plans are requiring a lot of money. Deporting people is extremely expensive. We don't have the detention facilities to do that. We're going to have to build a bunch of detention facilities in a short amount of time. And I saw somewhere it takes at least $12,000 to deport one person. So multiply that by 1 million, and it's going to cost a lot. Tariffs, I think, are something that can happen right away. There's a lot of authority for the president to do that on his own unilaterally. So I suspect that we will see something move on that very quickly.
You bring up a really good point about governing, and maybe, Dave, you want to give the Republicans some cautionary words about working within a trifecta of you can't get everything you want all at once, and beware of warring factions within your own party.
Oh, for sure. And I think also beware of overreach. It is not unusual for, and just listen to we think about what's been said in the last week. We talk of mandates and landslides, and it's none of that, right? I mean, Trump is going to win the popular vote by a smidge.
50.2% currently.
Maybe. I think it's going to fall below.
As they count more in California.
It's going to fall below 50%. But you hear all of these, Republicans are clearly ecstatic about the victories that they've had, right? And what they see as an opportunity in front of them.
Or what they called a mandate.
Which it is not, right? I mean, I think that
but that's what you hear the messaging
absolutely
is everywhere.
And that's why I think they're going to do what a lot of times parties do when they have a victory, is they're going to read their press clippings and they're going to read the headlines and they're going to overreach. So I also think too that they're going to find it difficult to legislate on anything controversial. Very thin majority in the House with that seems to be decreasing daily because these cabinet folks are getting plucked from the House. And of course, nowhere near 60 votes in the Senate. And boy, aren't Democrats glad today that they didn't do away with the filibuster.
And so it makes me also think about Michigan's congressional delegation and their influence perhaps in Washington. Now we have 2 new members that are going to be going there in Kristen McDowell-Rivet and also Tom Barrett. We now have the Republicans, the slim 7-6 majority here in the state. Let me ask you, Nicole, what kind of influence are you seeing from our Michigan lawmakers in Congress this time around? And then also you have Alyssa Slotkin joining Gary Peters in the Senate.
Yeah, so Michigan, the delegation is pretty much split down the middle, and a lot of faces that haven't been there for a long time, so they're going to be working on getting more seniority so that they can more say in things. I think that the Republicans in Michigan are going to have a tough call whether to support getting rid of these incentives for EVs, which I don't think any of the big three automobile companies in Michigan actually want those incentives to disappear. So that's going to be a tough call for them whether to support that or not.
Yeah. What about you?
I think it'll be interesting to see if Lisa McClain from the, it used to be the 10th district, maybe it still is, maybe the 9th. It's the Thumb district that actually comes down into Oakland County a little bit. She is running for one of the leadership posts in the House Republican Conference. If she is selected, that'll give Michigan Republicans more of a seat at the leadership table, which could be important.
Yeah, I think about that also. And, with Debbie Stabenow leaving the U.S. Senate, when you have someone who has been entrenched in that long and that has that kind of sway, power on higher committees, and, you see Michigan maybe losing some of that, whether you are Republican or Democrat, to be able to advocate for policies in terms for the state.
And Debbie Stabenow with, one of the issues that, frankly, Democrats, at least outside of the sort of plain states, aren't known for sinking their teeth into, right? She was incredibly influential with agriculture.
Yeah, the Farm Bill
and she
and everything,
had every year, right? She was the lead on that, and the farmers in Michigan love Debbie Stabenow. We'll see how that relationship changes with Alyssa Slotkin into that seat. We'll see if she tries to build those fences, and she comes from a ranch farming family. There's some that makes some sense.
It's funny. I was speaking to a Republican lobbyist who said that a lot of Republicans like Alyssa Slotkin, that she sometimes had to remind them, no, she's a Democrat, and to remember what party you're voting for. But I think it's interesting, Nicole, when you talk about can you truly work with the other side of the aisle? What will we see right now in terms of Democrats really wanting to work with Republicans feeling very stung?
Yeah, I think in the Senate, that's the forum where it's really necessary to work together. Every bill that comes up in the Senate, you have to have agreement between the majority and minority leaders to even bring it up. So I think that's an opportunity for Alyssa Slotkin to be one of the people that is willing to work with other people. She's part of the in the House, she was part of the House Problem Solvers Caucus. So that indicates she's interested in bipartisanship. And being a swing state, she'll be eager to show some bipartisanship in D.C.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the work that we're going to be seeing here in Michigan, and then maybe in the first of the year with the Republicans in the state house. I want to talk a little bit, though, about what we could see in this lame duck session, Dave, in terms of possible economic incentives, the SOAR incentives. Will that be brought back up again? Or what do you see that we could see a little bit of policy shift with the different leadership now?
Well, I think one of the things you're going to see is, at least based on what I read yesterday, is a bill to change the way Michigan allocates its electoral votes, and where Michigan, it's going to be proposed, I believe, to have Michigan join the interstate compact that would say that Michigan's state vote doesn't matter, and that Michigan will align its electoral votes with whoever wins the popular vote at the national level. Right now, that interstate compact has got it's nowhere near the number of states with the number of electoral votes that it needs to go into effect. The last time I looked, anyway. So, but I think that this is a prime time for Democrats to push that through over objections of every Republican.
I think what also is concerning a little bit about lame duck session, too, is that stuff can get pushed through without a lot of conversation and without a lot of debate, no matter who is in charge of the House and the Senate at the time. That's always something that I look for, Nicole.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't expect that much to happen at this lame duck session. The previous lame duck session, when Republicans lost control, you saw a lot of activity. But with still having a Democratic governor, Republicans... the Democrats will be unwilling to take some really unpopular positions on things like driver's license for undocumented immigrants or some transgender rights issues they'd be a little more reluctant to do that than normally if they were losing the trifecta.
Because again, it's a very slim majority, and there is an election in 2 years. I want to talk a little bit about what went right this election period. So much had been made of, can we count on the integrity of our vote, the security of our vote? Will things be counted correctly? Will we get results in a timely fashion? And I think when we step back and we look at some of the chaos that happened in 2020, and we look at where we are now, we had early voting for the first time. So many people took advantage of that. We had a record number of people who voted this time around, 200,000 more than in 2020. I would consider what we saw in terms of process-wise to be a success. Dave, when you look at that, how far does that go to giving people, building back a little bit of trust in the larger picture?
Yeah, every little bit helps. And I think that, one of the things that really was a plus for Michigan this time around was the ability for local clerks to be able to start processing absentee ballots 8 days before Election Day, rather than have to do it all on the, starting at 7 a.m. on, in this case, November 5th. So that, I think, allowed for the, a pickup in speed for when we got results. I'd also say, the almost 1,600 local clerks that are responsible for election administration in Michigan deserve, a lot of thanks and a lot of respect. I think this was not my idea, but I will say that in terms of generating support and confidence in the system, I have been convinced that we should treat being an election poll worker like we do jury duty. Everybody should do it, because you will get an inside view of what actually happens. You will see the sausage being made, and I think that would see trust skyrocket. So if there are any state legislators listening, push that one through in lame duck.
It's going to be the Julio legislation. We're going to name it that way, Nicole.
Actually, that is how they do it in the state of Nebraska, and they said that they have had increasing calls from other states about how that works, and basically you can opt out of jury duty and do 4 elections as an election worker instead of doing jury duty.
I think it's really interesting, and then if you have employers jump on that and let people be able to have the day off or paid day off to be able to do that. I think what was really interesting for me when you look at the process to know that it is a disconnected system, that it is each municipal clerk that is responsible for his or her own municipality and getting that vote done. So the city of Warren, they decided not to do the pre-processing. They decided with their workforce and budget that they wanted to start counting that day at 7 a.m. And it is up to whoever the clerk is, and it's on them in terms of making sure that then the results get through.
Yeah, Michigan's a little unusual in that respect.
Yeah.
Most states run it at the county level. Of course, Michigan will say this is our strength, is it's even more decentralized, so it's harder to tamper with. There is maybe a little less professionalism than in other states. Perhaps they do it at a higher level. I'm a little worried that the bar for elections going smoothly has been lowered a little bit. We did have some ballot boxes be bombed, and there were bomb threats at multiple polling places across the election, but there was no riot, so we can say that.
We can say that.
Now that I see him sitting back there, Chris Reed, was that your idea on the that was Brian Beerley. We'll call it the Beerley Law.
There you go. Talking about trust brings me kind of to the civic engagement and the civic dialogue part of all of this, because I still feel that a week after the election, you have half of the country who is terribly disappointed with the results, and you have half the country that is terribly excited about the results. And I still feel that there is this polarizing feeling that how could I be friends with that person who voted that way? And I'm not sure. You're smiling, but I'm not sure that there's a lot of people that want to get over that. There's still a lot of anger, I think, from the one side that whose candidate did not win.
Well, just wait 2 years. Every incoming president since Bill Clinton has come in with a trifecta, and everyone has lost it immediately. So Republicans might be sitting high right now, but midterm elections coming up, Trump's got a lot of policies that might turn out to be incredibly unpopular. Tariffs on goods from other countries could exacerbate inflation. Rounding up a bunch of illegal immigrants is going to produce a lot of news stories about children being separated from their parents. We're going to have pictures of crops on the rotting on the vine because there's no one there to pick it. So I think that Trump's got some work ahead of him to actually show that he can solve some of the problems that he said he was going to solve. And I think Democrats are likely to have a good year in the midterms if history proves any rule.
It could make them stronger. Dave, what do you think about that in terms of, I think, the feelings on both sides?
Yeah, you hate to see it, right? I mean, it was an important election because there was a huge difference between how these candidates would have pursued policy change, right? I mean, they don't disagree on the issues so much as, what's got to be dealt with, but they certainly disagree and propose different ideas for how to, pursue solutions to those policy problems, those issues. And, I think to some extent, the elected officials and candidates who are now, think about the U.S. Senate and the House, right? These 535 folks have just spent a solid year basically having each other punch them in the face during campaign season. And now they're going to go back and try to work together. I think they can handle it better than some of the public. You see already about, well, I'm not inviting so-and-so to dinner for Thanksgiving. I'm not going to talk to this person anymore. I mean, you hate to see it, right? It's a shame. It's important, but I hate to see people lose friends and family over it.
All right, this seems like a good time to invite friends and family into this conversation. So you've been a great audience and sitting here and listening to us, taking this all in. So if someone has a question, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have you come join me up here so we can make sure we see your face on camera and all that good stuff. Anybody have a question for our panel? Because I got tons still. But if anyone's got a question, they want to come on up and ask right here.
Don't be shy.
Oh, my gosh, y'all are shy. Okay, so I'm going to ask. Do you have a question, sir? Come on up. This is my favorite Phil Donahue part of the show. Thank you. At least 5 people laughed at that. Now, come on over here so we can get you on. No, you're not taking my chair, sir. Then you put me out of a job. What's your name?
My name is George
Okay.
Pitchford.
And where are you from, George?
I'm from Sylvan Lake.
All right. Why don't you go ahead, look at our panel. What's your question?
My question, in the form of a statement almost, is one of the most troubling statements to me is hearing folks say, this is not who we are. And sort of some background to that is Donald Trump won 70 million plus votes in 2020. Donald Trump, as many people would agree, was a very, very flawed candidate, and he won 70 plus million votes in 2020. How do we continue to say that's not who we are? And of course, he wins the election this time. So I guess my question would be, how are we going to fix anything if we don't confront what the real problem is? And I think the real problem often is not some of the things that are problems, that as we talk about some of that Kamala Harris didn't say this when she should have said that. And yeah, some of those things are problems. But to me, there's an underlying problem somewhere, and I would just like to know from these wonderful people here, do you see it as us not having identified the real problem? I mean, there's something wrong, and there's something about who we are if, in fact, not just this time, but the previous time, a very flawed candidate got 70 million plus votes.
All right. Thanks, George. I appreciate that. You can go on and sit down. Nicole, you want to handle that
Well,
first?
I think just something to keep in mind, and thank you for your question/comment, is that when people vote for Donald Trump, they're not necessarily endorsing, and they probably definitely are not endorsing everything that he stands for. They just agree about one thing, or they think one thing that he's going to do is more important or in the right direction. And in the same way, if people vote for Harris, that doesn't mean they completely agree with everything that Harris stands for, or they're endorsing everything that she stands for. So we got to remember that this is an election that a lot of people wanted change in the country. Inflation has been a huge problem. It looks like it's going down a little bit, but not so as much that you can tell at the grocery store that your costs are smaller. And people might have voted for Trump for that reason, but disagree with some things that he does personally. And so we don't need to question the inner core values of every American that voted for him, I think.
You know, I guess I would take it in a slightly different, I don't disagree with any of that. I would co-sign all of that. But, you know, I think 2024, as I said at the beginning, was a change election. And every major fundamental in politics, you know, there was a shift in partisan identification toward Republicans. Republicans were perceived as being able to handle the best or the most important issue in facing the country. Republicans were perceived to be the ones who could keep the country prosperous. Up and down the list of factors and dynamics that were important this time, Republicans had an advantage. So, you know, I think Kamala Harris was in part, she was not set up to fail, right? That's, I think, a cop-out on the Democrats' part. But boy, she sure faced some major political headwinds that any Democrat was going to have trouble bumping up against. And honestly, I think if Joe Biden had stayed the nominee, he loses, then we would have had a landslide.
Anybody else want to come on up here? Oh, come on up. How you doing? What's your name?
My name is Sharita Jackson.
Okay, Sharita, go ahead.
The term identity politics was used a lot during this election cycle, and as far as dimensions of diversity and attributes, everyone has an identity. When we look at VP Harris, I feel personally that she didn't spend a lot of time talking about identity. However, I feel the opposing side did in many ways. How do you think that impacted the election results, and how do you think we move forward considering that?
Thank you. Go ahead and sit down. Thank you so much.
That's interesting. And thank you for the question. I think we saw some interesting shifts related to identity politics, right? African American men, Trump does significantly better. Hispanic American men, Trump gets 46% of the Hispanic American male vote. So I think there were some groups where it hurt Trump and some groups where it helped. I mean, I think that, or maybe where it didn't matter, where his message or he connected with voters on other things, right, where everybody wasn't focused on the same thing. To pick up on something Nicole said previously.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of interesting that Harris didn't really lean into, I would become the first female president. And I think the thought was she was already doing pretty well among women and that she really needed to reach out to men. I don't know if that was exactly the best choice. I think she might have just leaned into it a little more. But that was an interesting choice that her campaign made.
All right, who
I saw
else?
a hand in the back.
Anybody else have a question in the back? Come on down. Now I'm doing my best Bob Barker impersonation. Yeah. What's your name?
My name's Greg Marinelli.
Okay, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, so the founders understood that factions would quickly arise under democratic rule, right?
Federalist Papers here.
Federalist Papers are they're coming up to, that we need to pay attention to them now before we lose our country. But they've realized that factions would quickly arise. So that is why they instituted a Republican form of government. And there's one guarantee in the Constitution, and that is for a Republican form of government in Article 4, Section 4. So my question is, how do we guarantee a Republican form of government with national popular vote when that forces us into faction because certain areas of the country will take control over the popular vote. And as I see it, it would force a Democrat domination if we allow that to take place. What's your comment?
All right, thanks so much.
Well, I think you're 100% right about faction. And it was one of the things that James Madison in those Federalist Papers wrote about so eloquently. And they were right about the danger of faction, right? And they were, as much as the framers tried to put in place structures and powers that would keep factions or political parties at bay, we still see them develop and have such a big influence. I think, national popular vote versus electoral college, maybe it's a cop-out. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. But I would say that I think those who are in favor of a national popular vote would turn it around and say, well, there are places in the country now that have an outsized and oversized role rather than different parts of the country, right? Why these 7 states? Why not everybody? I think it's a debate to have.
All right, we're going to have time for one more question. One more question? You want to come on up? Come on over. I want to be able to hear you. What's your name?
Joseph Lee.
Okay.
The Democrats, they were often puzzled as to why they lost. I wanted to interject that there was, I call it partisan politics, and the other side had brought up many issues like, who's the governor of Florida? Ron DeSantis. Like Ron DeSantis would say, okay, there's homosexuality, and I don't think any kid should hear the word homosexuality until 3rd grade. Well, then you ponder that, and you're like, well, that sounds really good. But then you ponder it some more, and you're like, you're excluding people, and you're dismissing them as not existing. So then after thinking about it more, you're like, well, that's wrong. That's just wrong. And the Republican Party had brought up so many different issues. The price of eggs and bread, the price of gas. I mean, the price of gas is the normal price it's always been. But they've brought up so many of these little things and made big arguments out of them. There's going to be a drag queen in every classroom. And my neighbors tell me they're afraid their children are going to go to school and there's going to be a drag queen teaching them how to do school, I guess. I don't know what their problem is. But most of them, you delve into what they are, and they're false. They're false things, but they were really adamant about bringing up so many different things to make Americans fight against each other. It's not really a question, but...
It kind of goes back to messaging that we talked about a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, and campaigns will try out a lot of different messaging and see what sticks, and then it gets refined as the campaign goes on. So I think initially you might have seen more of the culture issues being used, but in the end you saw a lot more focus just on the economic issues from the Republican Party.
And I think the exit polling or the AP vote cast bears it out that this election was, as I said before, a change election, and one that was heavily dominated by the economy as an issue for a lot of Americans.
All right, I'm going to end up with a bit of a crystal ball question, because we talked a little bit about local politics and where things, obviously, we're going to have another election in 2 years. And then we're also going to be looking forward towards the Michigan gubernatorial election. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I think, what shuffling that we could be seeing. We're waiting to hear from Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan on what his thoughts are in terms of he's going to run again. And that could open up a whole different can of worms for a lot of other people. So, I mean, it's possible that he could be looking at the governor's race. You also have Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, who could be looking at it as well. Jocelyn Benson on the Democrat side. When we talk about the Republican side, Nicole, you mentioned that we could perhaps see the return of Tudor Dixon. I mean, is a John James candidacy out of the question? I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on politically what we should be watching for now in this next year or so, Nicole.
I think Republicans will shoot for recruiting a House member to run for the governorship. someone who's got higher name recognition and can raise a lot of money. I think that would be their safest avenue. Of course, you don't want too many to run at the same time, and then you're left with fewer people in your House delegation. On the Democratic side, Duggan is going to be a formidable candidate if he chooses to run, and I suspect that we'll see some opposition from him in a primary from a more progressive candidate, because Duggan will appeal more to like the moderate voters.
I think it'll be a free for all on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a bunch of them vying for that. On the Republican side, I think they'll be happy if they can find one that fits the description that Nicole mentioned. I know we're short on time, but just real quick, first of all, thanks to everybody for coming, and a huge thank you to Channel 4 and Local 4 Plus for coming out 3 times to campus. It's been a wonderful experience for us, and I hope we'll be able to do it again soon.
Yeah, we're going to continue to follow the political trail. You make sure you stay with us at clickondetroit.com. How about a big round of applause for Dave Giulio and Nicole Matthew? And for you guys, I really appreciate the great contextual and thoughtful conversation that we have around politics. It's necessary because it will continue. We all get to live here in the great state of Michigan and in the U.S., and it's something that all the policies are going to impact all of us. So keep it with us. Thanks so much for watching. You can watch this on demand on Local 4 Plus. Appreciate you joining us on clickondetroit.com. That's going to do it for me today. We'll see you later. Take care.